Hello, I'm Charlie Wells and welcome to Self Matters, the podcast where we interview the people shaping the future of mental health. Today's guest is Dr. Sotiris Posporelis, who's a clinical neuropsychiatrist at the Maudsley in London. He's been shaping the future of mental health care for the last few decades. I'm delighted to have him. He's a high energy, high octane storyteller. So hopefully we'll hear all about living in Greece, brains, motorbikes, music, being house MD, but most importantly, how he looks after himself and how we can create a better mental health system, both in the UK and the whole world. It's great to have you on the podcast. Let's jump in. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Pospo.
Hey, Charles. Impressed with your Greek, I have to say. Nobody can really pronounce the name fully.
We're going to start off with the story behind Dr. Pospo. You obviously grew up in Greece, but how did you find your way to becoming a consultant neuropsychiatrist in London?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm the last person to give advice about career paths because, mine is, all over the place. It was certainly fun, I gotta say, but at the same time, it was like a maze, going round and round, finding other interests, along the way. I wouldn't be, what I am now if I didn't have all these other, branches of my life keeping me sane, if you like, because, I like it, a bit mixed. I always wanted to become a doctor. That's the interesting fact. And everyone in my family was trying to convince me otherwise because, it's a long career and, pretty tiring, I have to say, and, long studies. So nobody, first of all, I don't have anyone in the family that's a doctor, right? So I'm the first one. Really, really early on, I didn't have any other interests. So for me, my life was always, music and medicine, nothing else. I studied medicine in Greece. Then at some point around the fourth year, I always wanted to do something with the brain, right? So for me, it was either neurology, neurosurgery, or psychiatry. So there was only these three things. Neurosurgery, I would have killed many people along the way because these things really are completely useless. So, early on I decided this is definitely not for me. Plus my attention span, it's really bad. So, I wouldn't be able to make it. And I was always between neurology, and psychiatry. So around the fourth year, I had a really good, neurology professor, and it attracted me even more. It made me feel that, okay, this is, what I want to do. 2004, I had a massive accident, with my motorbike. I love speed as well. So everything just got, rearranged in my life and reshuffled, right? So I had to take a break for a long time, couple of years until I walk back, properly, loads of operations and stuff, really boring things. But the thing is that, I took a step back from everything. And the thing that kept me sane was music. So essentially, although medicine was always a bit, up when it comes to professionally, if you like, music started taking, the upper hand. And for many, many years, up until I was 30, you wouldn't believe it, but, I had the #1 radio show, back home, for a few years. And then I decided that I'm having too much fun. So, I need to stop that. I need to torture myself. I need to go back to medicine. Because obviously, there was a bit of me that was missing, right? And the reality is that, if you leave it, with medicine, if you don't get updated and, if you don't get in the loop, with what's happening, essentially you're going to lose it. So one day I just, quit and moved to England to pursue, both, my hobbies, if you like, both medicine, but also music. So, I was DJing and I still have a record label and I don't think that in other parts of the world it would be as easy, if you like, as in London. So being able to work in, world-renowned institutions, train in institutions like that. So I trained at the Maudsley, then I left around 2012. I went for 1.5 years in Hopkins across the ocean, did some research there. And then I came back, finished my training here, and here I am.
I love your story. Thank you so much for sharing it. You're certainly the only sort of psychiatrist / record label mogul / DJ I know. There's like some areas I'd really like to kind of dig into a little bit deeper. You said that really early going into medicine you were really interested in brains. I guess why have brains always fascinated you? Because most doctors want to fix someone's leg or become a surgeon. Like why was it people's heads that became interesting?
I mean, when it comes to organs, for example, who wants to spend a bloody lifetime, checking the thyroid? I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the thyroid. I'm sorry, thyroid. I'm really sorry, thyroid. And we do know that there is a really clear link with thyroid and, of course, mental health. But the reality is that, as Luria used to say, psychiatry is the last romantic of the neurosciences, right? I mean, even if there was a really recent, I think it was last week or something like that, there was a publication in Nature, it's one of the most prestigious, if you like, scientific journals, and essentially what they did, they visualized 1 cubic millimeter, of someone's brain. And it's chaos. It's absolutely beautiful. It's chaotic, but so, and then you're like, how the hell, this beautiful thing makes so much sense. It allows us, to integrate everything from around and, and function and feel and think and behave and all these things. When you see it, it's like mad, and it's just 1 cubic millimeter. So for anyone that sees that part, even if you see just this image, it's just amazing. And also it's such a beautiful mystery, right? We're really far away from, fully understanding, how the brain, works and functions and allows us to enjoy life, as it is. So yeah, it's just fascinating. I love the mystery. I mean, it's always, of course, the other more cliche part of psychiatry, if you like, which I have to say that, being a neuropsychiatrist, liaison neuropsychiatrist, I do get loads of really beautiful histories and fascinating life journeys of my patients, but it's really fast, and this is what I love, of course, being a liaison, neuropsychiatrist. We're really privileged to have the opportunity, to essentially, catch a glimpse, in someone's, life. It's just, fascinating, and all this comes from in here.
It is brilliant, isn't it? I guess we have different trainings, but as a neurobiologist, I spent a year studying a single neuron, right? And still, we don't understand how a single neuron works. But you put literally billions of them together, and we get consciousness. How on earth does that happen? It's extraordinary. For those who don't know, my story, I had a brain hemorrhage about 10 years ago, but I always find it interesting. You meet people who have these kind of transformative sort of injury moments of their lives. It creates a really interesting moment for reflection and sort of introspection about what you really think's important. So, you mentioned it, that you had your motorbike accident and a couple of years kind of rebuilding yourself. I guess, how has that affected the way that you make decisions and the choices you've made in your life?
The first thing I was thinking about, okay, when I'm going to fix my legs and all that stuff to go back in the mountain and start snowboarding, obviously this was, maybe a knee-jerk reaction, right? And as time went by, I did have time to reflect, and there was times that, it hit hard. When you survive an accident like that, or a big trauma in your life, right? So the first thing that kicks in essentially is the survivor thing. Okay, I made it. This makes you happy. Oh, phew. And then you try to make fun of it, but then you realize that the recovery process is the difficult bit. Surviving, of course, is the most important thing because it gives you, if you like, a second lease in life. But hardly ever people talk about how difficult the journey after that is, and how important it is to have people around you, be it family, friends, professionals. That can support you in all this. I remember the first Christmas, because this happened in May, right? The first Christmas, I wasn't feeling it. I wasn't feeling that it was Christmas. It's as if my clock just stopped there in around May, June time, and because then it was full of hospitals and rehabilitation and all that stuff. So when Christmas came, I was like, what is happening? I couldn't feel it. And this took a few years, to be honest, until my internal clock catches up with life events around. And so in that sense, I think it did affect me.
And then all of those choices ended up with you being a kind of neuropsychiatrist, as you said. I love the way you kind of quipped, I just moved to London and decided to study at the Maudsley. Like, everyone wants to study at the Maudsley. It's an extraordinary place to study. And then popped over to the US, to the Hopkins Institute. Like, these are all Ivy League institutions where you can learn great craft and meet amazing people. And it's turned you into this sort of extraordinary kind of consultant neuropsychiatrist. You're quite passionate about teaching and sharing your knowledge, and you've been really involved in grand rounds. So could you tell us a little bit about how you're trying to kind of change the system and spread the knowledge?
I don't know if, any single person can just, show up and change the system. But I do feel that, every one of us, just by trying to make small changes, in their surroundings, their immediate surroundings. So, how you interact with your trainees or how you interact with your medical students. So all these things create, a beautiful culture. So if each and every one of us, pay attention to the little details of our everyday life, and clinical, professional, and everything you name it. I do feel that in the grand scheme of things, it can bring change. One thing I learned from my stay at Hopkins, right? So disclaimer, I was never an academic. So the thing that it was good about me, it was, if I liked something, I would just put myself out there. Say, I want to do this. I never said I'm amazing or whatever, and I never went down that line. I said, that's really interests me. I have some time to devote, and I want to learn. Are you happy with that? And this is how it all went. I had a discussion with Akira, so Professor Sawa, at Hopkins, who, kindly agreed to have me there. And I remember that coming from a clinical background, being immersed in this, really high tech, basic neurosciences and neuroimaging that they were doing, across the ocean. It was fascinating. It was daunting at the same time, but really fascinating. But the thing that was up to some extent missing, the big gap, between clinical life and academic life, right? And how, these beautiful, bright minds, they work to understand, how the brain works and how they can support, our patients, being with innovative treatments or diagnostics and all that stuff, but without having direct access. And, how does it feel, to talk with someone who has a delusion? So how does it feel to hear, voices all the time? How does it feel to be depressed or anxious? And, many times, I would read like really, really highly impactful papers. But it was just that the researcher was doing a massive leap of faith. I wanted to bridge, the gap, between clinicians, and academics. And this is how I started, this series that still happens, takes place, at Hopkins, that essentially was bringing in the same room, clinicians and scientists. So one week it would be a clinician that talks about a clinical case, and then the other week it would be a scientist. They say, I'm studying this, so what's your opinion? What am I doing wrong? And essentially they got to know each other, and it was fascinating because these people used to work in the same corridor, but it was different parallel worlds. And this was something that I was really proud about, and it really made a difference. It also made a difference to how I approached science as well, and even coming back here. So that was a big thing. Now the grand rounds that you mentioned, this is a different thing. So the Maudsley Grand Rounds is one of the most iconic and historic events at the Maudsley. It has been happening since forever, right? So back in the day, it would be, let's say, a big professor or a big clinician that would discuss a case. Sometimes they would bring the patient, and then there would be many trainees, many junior doctors, just observing and trying to learn from essentially a more fancy way of bedside teaching, right? So what we're doing now with the grand rounds obviously is slightly different. So essentially I'm inviting clinical teams from all around the Maudsley. The Maudsley obviously it's a hospital, but it's also a trust, so that covers many different hospitals in Southeast London. So I invite clinical teams to present the life journeys of patients that stuck with them. And this is either, because they were like really, difficult to treat cases, or either there was something that has to be learned. It may be that, patients are still open, to their caseload, and they just, want to understand how they can help them better. We do have many times, patients or their families, attending and sharing, their life experiences, with us. This is beneficial both for the teams, but also, of course, for the families, because, we also have, experts, from all the respective fields, and that, they give their opinion after they hear, about the case, about, what we could do better, if there is something, obviously, more that we can try. And a few times in the year, I invite clinical teams from other parts of the world. So far I had, obviously, from the States, from Germany, from Chile, from Mexico, from Iceland was the last one, and this is just to show how different can be the practice of psychiatry in different parts of the world. How culture can affect the way psychiatrists practice, or even the most practical thing, right? Money. So the availability of funding and services in different parts of the world. I mean, it's fascinating. It's sometimes it's completely different.
I love this idea of the grand rounds. I think the idea that you've taken what was a kind of traditional follow the consultant round and take notes, and really started thinking about it on a kind of global scale. I love the idea of bringing fascinating minds with different backgrounds and skill sets to look at a single case and from lots of different angles. And then the fact that you've taken that to understand that we're all humans with brains, but cultures affect our practices, resources affect our practices, knowledge is not evenly distributed. I think it's a really clever idea. I can imagine you like this house MD orchestrating this kind of this global world of psychiatry and psychology. What's your proudest moment from Grand Rounds?
One fascinating one. It was a presentation that was completely led, by one of the patients. So this was a really humbling experience. So this was a patient that, had a really long, inpatient admission. So in one of the psychiatric hospitals. And we're talking about, a few months. He wouldn't be even able to think, before this admission that at some point he would be able to go out and talk, to a whole lecture theater, about his experiences. He was, so disabled, by his mental health difficulties. But having him there, and obviously no credit to me, right? So I wasn't his treating clinician, but, having him there, after this, long and difficult journey, of recovery, just, sharing their experience, and you could see he would just glow. This was, a really beautiful moment, So I can't even think, how the treating team was feeling, there. I could see they all had smiles up to here. And the other beautiful time was really recent, actually. It was last year, because last year was the 100 years. We're celebrating 100 years since the Maudsley, opened its doors. I approached retired clinicians from all around the world that trained at the Maudsley. We're talking about people that were, when I approached them, they were in Australia, they were in the States, in Switzerland, Africa, so from all around the world. And it was fascinating. I mean, one guy was like in his 90s. The spark in his eyes. He couldn't take enough of psychiatry. And the passion and the love that, she was sharing, with all of us. And, sometimes, we tend to forget, all the, the beauty of being a clinician. Whoever has the time or the access to medical records, from back in the 60s or 50s or, even earlier, and see, how beautifully, clinicians would talk about their patients. It was just amazing. It was just like a novel. But just reading it, it was just you had the patient in front of you. But now everything is, operationalized and, bullet points, and obviously, we see, way more patients. There's not enough of us, so everything becomes more, if you like, boring and, to the point.
You're living a life at full space. You're DJing, running record labels, you're doing grand rounds, you're teaching, you're a consultant neuropsychiatrist. What do you do for you? How do you ensure that yourself is at the top of its game the whole time when making these kind of big calls?
I talk to my mom every morning because I cycle from Hackney down to South London, right? So I have my phone, just there, and as I ride, I talk to her every morning, and trust me, it's liberating. I can nag to my mom, forever. So I'm becoming 46 in August, right? And I feel again like in this beautiful cocoon, and I feel secure and all that stuff. I mean, I'm so lucky to have, obviously my dad, if he hears me, Dad, I love you too as well, he's also on the call, don't worry. But joking aside, keeping a balance, it's again, I know it sounds, cringe and all, but it's so difficult. You keep on saying, you keep a balance and all that, but then life is just a bit tsunami, it just comes. So by the time you say, okay, now everything is under control, no, baby, this is definitely not under control. And maybe that's the beauty of it, right? If everything is under control, at least for me, right? It becomes a bit boring. But as I said, the thing that keeps me sane is also that I am trying to keep other branches of my life open. Maybe I could have achieved, more things, if I was, only, interested in, neuropsychiatry, most probably. But the reality that I wouldn't be happy. So, being so immersed, into the world of music, it definitely keeps me sane. Exercising, every morning. So I go to the gym before I come here. This, definitely keeps me, sane. As sane as you can be. We all have, ups and downs. We all have times that we say, "What the hell?" Just give me a break. And keeping a balance, it's about, appreciating, these moments and being able to reflect. Keeping a balance, by no means does it mean that everything is fine. Keeping a balance doesn't mean that you're not going to have your down days or your anxious moments, or being uncertain about, am I doing the right thing?
I love your description of balance. So many people look for kind of work-life balance as if they've just got to get it right the whole time, right? But I think this idea of it's almost having somewhere else you can put your energy, because if you're finding being a psychiatrist hard that day, music can give you that energy back. And so rather than it just being like everything has to be equal, it's about like, can you find a way to kind of rebalance your energy the whole time? Because at some point, something is going to pull you down, so you need something else to pull you up a little bit. It's a lovely idea of keeping a sort of varied self and a whole self. Obviously, you've spoken with passion about how supportive you are of the NHS, but the way that we approach mental health broadly, NHS and private in the UK, is probably suboptimal. Let's be honest. Right? We're not managing to serve everyone yet. So this is a difficult question to answer, I know. But let's imagine you had a magic wand, or you were Prime Minister for the day, or all of a sudden you were appointed the Chief Psychiatry Officer of the country. What would you do to improve the lives of every self in the UK?
So this is something we could talk for hours, right? It's a really sad situation. So as a neuropsychiatrist, so we're part of a national specialist service, right? So essentially, because there's not that many of us, around the country, people can be referred from all around. So this in itself, it's sad. So we don't have enough people to actually care for our own people, and this is really sad. Which means that for someone to come and see us, needs to go into extremely long waiting lists. I don't know if the answer is injecting more money or in bringing more people. Nobody can really say, right? But I think that giving the power back to the people would be one way to go about it. We're just trapped and drowning in really complex and extremely fragmented systems of the national health service, being directed and managed by people that have never seen a patient in their lives. The reality is that you need to have people up there that are clinically minded and oriented. It's like putting me in charge of the finances of someone's life, right? I'm completely useless. They're going to be bankrupt in like milliseconds. I'm going to go and buy many records. So I cannot give financial advice, right? Having clinicians at the helm, I think it's one way forward. I mean, we can talk for hours about the over-fragmentation of NHS, about too many people doing the same thing, or even don't knowing about other people's existence. I think that a change in the chain of management and leadership is going to be key, and essentially bringing back the whole focus, bringing it back to the person. I think this is the most important thing, because most times we lose sight of what we are there to do, right? So, and we are just I have 10 minutes, I have 15 minutes, you go to see the GP, and before you even say hi, you're out of the door. So it shouldn't be like that, and it's not the GP's fault. It's not the GP's fault. It's not the neurologist's fault that has 20 minutes to see you. How is it possible to really absorb someone's difficulties? At that moment in time, you are the most important person in the world, right? And the doctor that sees you needs to approach you that way. Needs to have the undivided attention. I know that it sounds really utopic and unrealistic, because at the same time, as you're trying to be there for the patient, you have blips going on, you have KPIs to follow, you have another 15 patients waiting for you, and so many other different things that will go on forever. And this is what makes it so daunting, right?
One of the big things we've always believed in is like, how do you make sure things are sort of clinician designed? How do you try and make things be clinician led? Do you think there are any kind of big misconceptions within the sort of mental health system or in the way that we treat individuals at the moment?
I think that one of the most important things, and one thing that actually brought loads of difficulties in practicing psychiatry, and people even being in tune with their feelings and their emotions, and accepting that they may in fact have some difficulties with their mental health, is this artificial division between the mind and the brain, or the brain and, the rest, of the body. And I think that, this completely artificial division between organic and non-organic, it brought so many problems in the practice of psychiatry, over the years, and in fact, perpetuated, the stigma that surrounds, mental health. Right? There's nothing non-organic, about your mental health. There's nothing non-organic, about your brain. I'm not saying that, what you experience in life, the trauma that you may have, endured, or, your everyday life, your interactions with people, of course they affect you. Of course they play a role in how you're going to be feeling. But ultimately, all these things, they get distilled and they get processed, up here, right? So the way we think, we feel, and behave has nothing to do with something, non-organic. There's nothing inherently wrong, with somebody that's, that's depressed. Some people, they feel, and this is obviously, because of the massive stigma, right, around, mental health. They don't feel comfortable, sharing this. I've never had anyone, feeling, ashamed, that they have a headache or a migraine, but mental health conditions specifically, because of the various different misconceptions, they don't feel really comfortable sharing that. And this has, massive, downstream effects in people's lives. Right? Bypassing this artificial division between organic, non-organic, or your mind and your brain, it's one way of, moving past, the stigma. So yes, so mental health conditions are as any other, condition. So when you talk about it, just feel free to talk about it, the way you complain to your manager that you have a fever today, and, sadly, you can't attend work.
As you said, it's been tens to hundreds of years where the stigma's been in place because people were a little afraid of it at the beginning, right? But that's led to sort of every sort of bias, even the sort of system bias, funding bias, like how do care systems work, like how do you talk about it, how do you help other people, all of these systems means we're playing catch up in the mental health space. Trying to solve the problem for the UK is big, but if you look globally, the vast majority of people have no access to anything, right? As in there is no mental health services in huge parts of the world. And there could be up to sort of 1.8 billion people every year that could benefit from some kind of psychological or psychiatric intervention. How are we going to, as a species, tackle mental health? It's always going to have less funding than our other body health systems had, because we've been building up body health systems for years. How would you go about approaching advising the rest of the world on what to do and what not to do, having seen it from a global lens?
The reality is that there's so much wealth, concentrated, in just a few people that don't care about, what's happening, below them. So again, if there was equal distribution of wealth, around the world, I know again it sounds utopic. I'm not saying that this can happen, overnight. Understanding the vast inequalities, not only, between countries, but even within our society, right? We live in London, in one of the, the wealthiest, cities in the world. We have loads of homeless people. We are living in a society that creates, more and more, children in poverty. So you don't have to look, really far, to see that, change needs to happen. Change needs to happen first, from within, from here, and then hopefully it will spread, out as well. And the other thing that I want to mention, before we go, mental health is not a hype. Psychiatry, is not a hype. Sadly, many people try to jump in the bandwagon of, well-being and mental health over the years, and they have made, millions by sometimes selling false hope to people. Right? With unproven methods, sometimes even dangerous and risky methods. And obviously people that are looking, for a hope, that are desperate for a solution, they're more prone to fall victims of scam. So look after your mental health. Don't believe the hype, around your mental health, and, trust, not blindly trust, but, trust, professionals that have your best interests at heart.
What a great kind of place to finish. We've started off as a boy on a beach dreaming of motorbikes in Greece. We've gone through teaching and grand rounds, being house MD. We've been to America, we've been to the UK, we've worked out how do you keep yourself well. We've reinvented how to solve the NHS problems, and somehow we managed to get to changing world redistribution of wealth and economics. But it all ends quite rightly on, like, you know, how do you make sure you look after your mental health, and how do you make sure you trust people who really know what they're doing? So, Dr. Pospo, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I could have talked to you for hours. I'm sure our listeners would have found this valuable, intriguing, informative. So thank you so much for your time. Have a fantastic day. Thanks for listening to Self Matters. We've got new episodes out every 2 weeks, so make sure you hit follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can listen to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and of course watch us on YouTube. As always, head over to our social media channels to find out who'll be joining us in the next episode. If you want to learn more about the stories behind the people shaping the future of mental health care, join us on Thursday the 13th of June at the Whole Self event, as we explore the interconnectedness of mental and physical health. That's all for today, though. See you next time.